Hello, everybody. We're going to wait just a minute to get everybody logged in here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Builder Partnerships Webinar Wednesday. Our webinar today is Embracing Digitized Estimating in Cost Control. Much of what you learned today is timeless and extremely beneficial, so make sure you're paying close attention and take good notes throughout the entire webinar. Before we get started today, I have a few housekeeping items. Although all of you are muted, we still encourage you to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll notice a Q&A chat bubble and also a chat bubble. Use those to ask questions during the webinar. We will do our best to answer them as they come up, but we'll likely hold most questions until the end. If you are watching the replay, please feel free to send us an email and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Today we have Dave Burley speaking. He's a Director of Purchasing and Estimating in Murray, Utah for BIMaire. He has over 15 years of high volume production purchasing estimating experience, specifically with single family, multifamily, custom, and hospitality experience. He's going to tell you a little bit more about himself. We have been working with BIMaire for quite some time, so we're excited to have them here today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to Dave. Thanks so much.
Perfect, thank you. So a quick introduction. Again, my name is Dave Burley, Director of Purchasing and Estimating for BIMaire, located out of Murray, Utah. Like Emma Jane said, I have about 15 years experience in the purchasing world, specifically working for large production single family builders, quite a bit of multifamily. We do some custom work and then took UPM that we're going to talk about today and broadcast that into hospitality so that we could apply those same principles to hotels to hone in on costs. I joined BIMaire back in 2017, excited at the opportunity of taking UPM purchasing out of just regional markets and spreading that nationwide. So the first thing, why are we here talking about this today? So I want to quickly touch on what your return on investment should look like when you switch to UPM purchasing. Obviously, knowing your cost is the biggest part of what we do, and it's our greatest opportunity to increase our margin dollars. I have a couple examples I want to go through with you today of active clients that we are working with. The first one is I have a national home builder who is currently converting all of their lumber over from lump sum into UPM. Throughout this process, we're currently seeing base house savings of $1,200 plus per unit just on base house. In addition, their current BPO spend as related to lumber has fallen $860 as of now. And we expect to continue to see that trickle a little bit more, probably closer to the $900 range. And then on top of that, we are working directly with our framers to show them that there's another roughly $500 that we could save per house, just if we got rid of some of their bad habits and followed the plan specifically. Next one, I call it 40. I have a builder in Dallas, Texas, that after we went through UPM, got them converted over, they kept telling me, hey, Dave, we're short on radiant barrier for our roof deck on every house we build. So we went back, looked through the estimates, double-checked the math, double-checked the scaling, double-checked our waste factors, and said, no, this looks perfect. So we finally went down to Dallas and took a tour, walked some houses with them, and to my own surprise, the framer flat out told me, well, Dave, we always order 40 extra sheets in case we need it. To which our reply was, seriously, 40 sheets on every house? And the answer was yes, every house gets an extra 40 sheets. This is a great example of, in the lump sum world, no one knew those extra 40 sheets were being budgeted into every home. We could only solve that by figuring out what the house needs versus what the framer was requesting. Next one, same builder in Dallas, came back to me and said, hey, we're averaging 30 2x6 by 8 footers on every house above and beyond what's been estimated. So we dug in, and what we found out is that they had missed that there was an old detail still floating around in the field that called for double window sills. In this particular area, they did not need double window sills. No one knew why they had them. But ultimately, we found that because of some bad information floating out there, every house, about 1,200 homes a year, was getting on average 30 extra 2x6s until we found the issue and resolved it. And then my personal favorite, recently while I was in Washington, D.C., I spoke with a roofer as we were converting to UPM, who flat out told me, Dave, there is no way that you can use math and geometry to figure out how much roofing goes on a home. He went on to explain the only way you can do it is you stand in front of the house, you look up at the roof, and you just know how much you need. Luckily, we went ahead and applied math and found that we were virtually identical on our counts for shingles, math versus his view. Unfortunately, his view didn't work very well for things like drip edge, underlayment, ice and water shield, where he was all very high compared to what geometry told us he needed for the home. So let's start high level. You're going to hear me say over and over again today the term UPM, or unit price measurement. So UPM is nothing more than taking a unit count or an estimate times a unit cost or bid equals your total contract or purchase order amount. It encompasses your bidding, your estimating, and your contracting phases all into one uniformed process. In addition, it's designed to separate our material and our labor from one another as we're doing our estimating and purchasing. So why would we do UPM? It's a big process. Not gonna lie to you, it's a lot of work to switch over to UPM, but we do that for certain reasons. First one is we get to reduce our bid cycle time. Now when a new plan is finished or a revision is done, we don't need to send everything back out to bid. We need to re-estimate or estimate the new plan and get those contracts through UPM. More importantly, as we've seen over the past few years, we want to manage labor and materials separate from one another. In the old days, trade contractor would come to us and say, hey, Dave, I have labor's up 5% this year. I'm going to need to get an increase. We really had a hard time dialing in what percentage of your total contract value is actually labor so that I'm only applying the labor where it belongs. Third is it gives us the opportunity to stop paying waste factors for labor. Waste factors make perfect sense for materials, but I shouldn't be paying to install all this stuff that you're not actually using. As we've gone through this market recently, custom requests are up. We're seeing a lot more people entertain custom requests, and normally under a lump sum environment, now the trade partner has to be re-engaged. They need to get their opportunity to put a bid out. Really long process to get through to our customers versus now the customer can tell us what they want. We make those modifications, re-estimate for those modifications, and know exactly what their cost is going to be so that we can pass on that retail to them. A big upside, not really what UPM is for, just a good byproduct, is as you're developing a new library of plans. UPM gives you the opportunity at any point to just kind of check your pulse. Do some quick estimating on that plan, take your current unit costs and figure out if you're in the right ballpark before you get that plan complete and find out it doesn't pencil for you. And then lastly is the ability to competitively price options and upgrades. I live in Murray, Utah. Here in Utah, you can't charge more than about $14,000 for a third car garage. Builders around the valley will tell you they can't make a good margin at that price. The reason for that is in the lump sum environment, we've trained our trade partners that's where they're really going to be able to beef up. And they're going to be able to charge really good on those options, which is making the options not effective for the buyer. And you end up seeing a decrease in option sales because they're just too expensive. And then how do we do this? So there's a couple of ways that we can utilize UPM or derive our UPM. The first thing is our end goal should always be, we want to manage these quantities in our ERP system. And it shouldn't matter what ERP system you're in, whether you're Cova, if you're Sage, Marks, Newstar, whoever it is, we want to be able to get those quantities in a way that you can use them in your ERP so that you can automate some of these processes. For the estimating itself, there's two different key ways to go right now. Most common is 2D digitized estimating. That's using a generally cloud-based digitizer and either someone in your facility or a third party providing the tracing of those plans to quantify out what your house requires. The up-and-coming version is to use 3D modeling with the material manager. This allows you, as you're designing your home and setting all those parameters correctly, now you can eliminate the need to have someone take that and estimate it, because now your model is going to give you the information through your material manager of all the parts and pieces that you could require for that home. And finally, just to illustrate, so we have three different ways that things are commonly purchased. We have lump sum, turnkey, and then UPM that we're covering today. In the lump sum world, we would see something that said concrete flat work, and there would be a cost associated. Slowly, people started moving more towards turnkey to say, okay, I still want all that stuff you included in your lump sum, but now I want it broken down into square feet so that I can know that I'm being treated fairly based on that square footage. UPM takes that a step farther and says, no, let's go deeper than that. Within that concrete flat work, how much concrete do you actually have? How much welded wire do you need? How much base do you need? How much vapor barrier? How much labor, etc. Breaks each of those down to the finest detail that you'd like to see. Keep in mind with UPM, it's customizable. Not everybody wants to go so deep. Some people are worried about how much concrete do I need and how much labor am I paying, but let the labor include some of these other things. That's the beauty of UPM, is you can scale it as you go to get deeper and deeper to really control those costs and waste factors. So like anything that's worthwhile, in order to roll out UPM, we really have to do it in a precise manner. Builders that have attempted UPM and did not like it, didn't like it because they failed to have a precise rollout. Something went wrong in the process, which hindered the success of the project. So we break down that process into 6 different buckets: UPM discovery, the actual estimating, purchasing under UPM, integrating all that information together, moving to finally release purchase orders, and then following up after we finish the process. For UPM discovery, first thing we need to decide is what platform do we want to use. I have 4 illustrated up on the screen right now. These are 4 very common estimating platforms. Bluebeam, which is widely used, but quite basic. Not as customizable as most people would like to see. And it's really good for high-level estimating, more like turnkey estimating, where you want areas, you want lineal footage, but you don't need to be able to do all that much with that information. Next step up would be Sage. Sage would be in the best category if you're a Sage customer, because it's a seamless integration. However, if you're using something other than Sage, then there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve to be able to get that information to be usable in another platform. Next up is Stack. Stack is a great program to use. There's 3 different tiers that they offer: good, better, and best. The good would be considered a basic. Their better would probably be a good, and their best is truly a best. But there are very different price structures that come with those 3 different tiers that they offer. In their lower tiers, you don't get to customize as much, but as you move into that higher price point tier, the customization really comes alive. And then I personally recommend PlanSwift as the best option out there. It's customizable to any ERP. So any way that you need to export data, PlanSwift can handle how to get that data exported. It's very quick and easy to learn, allows you to fully customize any tools and parts you'd like to use. It does have a high first-year investment, but its continual annual fees after that first year are by far the lowest of the categories. Once you've decided on that platform, we needed to move into setting our standards. So we want to make sure that you're documenting everything you're doing with estimating. How is that estimate being derived? What tools are being used? What are the rules for, do you leave windows in? Do you take windows out? All of those things need to be documented so that your trade partner can understand how you did your estimate, your staff can understand how you did your estimate, and most importantly, everyone can make sure that they're doing them exactly the same way so that we're getting the same results out of every plan that you touch. And then finally, with those documentations, you also need to make sure you're documenting your waste factors. It's a big discussion through the process. What's a fair waste factor? Once you've identified what that right amount is, you need to make sure that that's documented somewhere so that everyone knows this is the agreed upon percentage of waste. Once you've got your documentation going, now we need to start talking about parts. So we're going from either lump sum or turnkey with a limited parts library to now needing parts for all these parts and pieces that make up your home. So as we're doing that, we need to be asking ourselves, what parts do we need to build the house? Very important, how do you buy those? Are you buying them by the lineal foot, by the piece, by the roll? We need to know how those parts are actually purchased. Who's buying them? Are you as the builder buying concrete directly, or is you as a builder allowing your concrete labor to purchase the concrete on your behalf? Those need to be decided because that can change how our parts are set up. And then also, what units is the labor provided in? Not uncommon to run into situations where you may buy something by the piece or by the sheet or by the roll, but you pay for it labor-wise in lineal footage or square footage or some other unit of measure for the labor portion of it. We always recommend during part discovery make sure you're talking to your trade partners. Don't go build a complete parts library of 4, 5, 6,000 different parts and then start getting feedback from your trade partners that those just don't make sense for them. Make sure you're including them from the beginning and that they're getting their voice into the process even as early as creating parts. So as we move into now actually estimating, we wanted to share some best practices for you. First off, we never make assumptions. When you're switching to UPM, you're going to find that the plans may be a little unclear, some specifications may be a little unclear. Don't assume you know what they meant. Let's get the right answers so that we can make sure that what we're estimating is matching what's being built in the field. As we're estimating, we should always utilize the tool sets and templates that were built. That's how we can make sure that we have uniformed estimates. If something's missing, we don't want to just go create something on the fly and start tweaking with tools. That's going to break our uniformity. We want to make sure that we're using what was built, and if we run into something new that we haven't seen before, let's talk about it. Let's figure out the right way to handle it, and then let's incorporate it into the templates. We should always use peer reviews. As an estimator, when you finish tracing a plan, you should always have someone else look at that plan. That second set of eyes is great to make sure that your click points were right, that you set all your parameters correctly, that you set a 9-foot wall because it was a 9-foot wall, not because you clicked the wrong button. We also want to make sure that you're having your trade partners involved in that. There is no reason not to share your estimate with a trade partner and let them visually see that, yes, you did account for everything in that home. That lowers the ability for them to start arguing the quantities if they were involved in the estimating phase. Best practice that we have here at BIMaire is before you start the estimate, make sure you're reviewing the standards for that estimate. Make sure that you understand what you're being asked to do and what the process is that you've created. And then finally, don't bite off more than you can chew. If you have 50 plans in your plan library, don't think you're going to get all 50 done at one time. Take bite-sized pieces, take 3 plans or 5 plans, work them through the entire estimate, work them through the reviews, get any kinks ironed out, then move to another set of plans. It's common for people to try to just, I want to go Rambo and blow through all of this. You're going to wind up causing yourself a lot of headaches, and you're going to end up feeling overwhelmed. So make sure that as you move through, we're doing that in bite-sized pieces. Now that we have our estimates done, now we have to purchase based off of UPM. So similarly, first thing, make sure that you're only working a couple cost codes at a time. Now that you have 4,000 or so parts, don't try to bid all 4,000 of them at one time. Target specific trades, preferably trades that coordinate with each other, work through those, and then move on to the next set. Again, so you're just not feeling overwhelmed by this process. Make sure as you're starting this process that your trade partners know what the process for bidding is going to be. In a UPM environment, again, because we're talking thousands of parts, we can't have an opportunity for trades to just submit pricing whenever they think it's time to do it. There needs to be a clear outline, generally differs by category, of how often they're going to be allowed to renegotiate that pricing with you. Because you have those estimates, you also need to be prepared that at times you're going to need to break that old lump sum estimate down and try to work backwards into their number. Because a common issue or common concern when you first switch to UPM is a trade partner will feel like you're trying to rip them off. That's not the case. but you need to be able to work backwards to show them in their old lump sum number, where was the issue? I'll go back to that 40 extra sheets of radiant barrier. That's hundreds of dollars worth of radiant barrier. Of course, their PO is $100 lower because that's no longer included. We want to, as we're working through our pricing, we want to compare cost codes by plan. So when a trade partner comes to you and says, this is my unit cost, go run it across your plans. Make sure that unit cost makes sense on all plans. If they didn't just pick one, figure out what it should be and called it good, you want to make sure you're comparing plan over plan to make sure that that price makes sense across the plans. You need to be very approachable to your trade partners. Going over to UPM scares the living daylights out of trade partners. So they need to make sure that they know that you're there for them, that you want to work through this with them, that you're going to be flexible, that when a plan is estimated, if there is a true error, you're flexible to resolve that error. If they have concerns on the pricing, you're there to have those conversations with them. Make sure that you're staying very open with them. Also want to make sure that everything is documented as you go. You're going to have conversations with the trade partner today on UPM. In 3 months from now, they're going to want to rehash that conversation. Make sure you have everything documented of what you talked about. That way you can make sure that you're staying on that even playing field and able to have intelligent conversations about what their concerns are. Trade partners need to understand you already have a relationship with them. That's why they work with you. They need to be reassured that that relationship is still going to stay. UPM is not designed to break that relationship. It's just modifying how we do things. So they need to know that you're still there for them, that you still value them as a trade partner. And then finally, if you have questions at any point as you're going through, make sure you ask. Because your trade partner is going to be a little apprehensive about UPM to begin with, one little misstep or miscalculation or omission can make them lose complete faith in what you're doing. So make sure that you're asking clarifying questions as you go to limit that, that anxiety of them waiting to find that issue. And then moving along, now that you have all your unit costs, you have all your estimates done, so you have all of your quantities, now it actually needs to be implemented. This is a very critical step of getting all that information married together and put into your ERP system. So a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, whoever is the expert in your ERP is who should be doing those data transfers. All too often, the person that doesn't really know Newstar is the one that's going to load all this data to Newstar. You're asking for problems. Make sure that a subject matter expert in Newstar is the one doing that transfer for you. Secondly, every time that the data has to be manipulated or transferred from one sheet to another or typed in or all the different ways that we can move data, we're increasing the risk of having errors. So we want to limit those transfers. Ideally, we want to export straight from the estimating software directly into your ERP system without anyone having to touch the data. That protects us from getting data that's right in the estimate but incorrect in the system. Extremely important, we want to make sure that you've tested the living daylights out of your data before you start releasing purchase orders. Again, a trade that gets an incorrect purchase order is going to question UPM as a whole. It's UPM is busted if their purchase order is wrong. So we want to make sure that we dedicate and invest time into making sure that those are functioning correctly before we ever allow a trade partner to see one. And then finally, probably the biggest sin that we see on a daily basis, if there is a problem with the data, fix it at the root cause. All too often, we're going to release purchase orders, and that's when we find a mistake. And instead of going back and fixing the data, we just fix the purchase order. That worked today, that got that house out, the PO made it out, everybody's happy about it, but that means the problem's still out there and it's going to come up again. And what are the chances we catch it again? More importantly, after we've manually fixed that a number of times, it would have been a lot faster to just go fix it the right way instead of trying to take this Band-Aid approach. So once we're ready to actually release those purchase orders, keep in mind, you're the last resort. As a purchasing agent or purchasing coordinator, whatever function it is in your business that releases those purchase orders, you're the last person to see those before the trade partner gets to see them. So make sure, especially initially, that you are diligently reviewing those to make sure they're accurate before they go out. We need to be realistic in that when we switch to UPM, we're likely going to see an uptick in BPO requests temporarily. The trade partners are learning something new. They're going to start requesting additional material or additional labor. You need to be prepared for that. It's likely going to happen. Don't let it catch you off guard. The key is when you get those, you need to make sure that you're actually researching them. If someone requests extra material or extra labor, why do they need it? Do they actually need it? And do we need to go fix the estimate because of what we just found? Number three, like I said, I'm an old purchasing guy. I love sitting in my air-conditioned office. But when you go to UPM, you have to be available to be on site. The fastest way to resolve issues is to actually be out there in the field with your trade partner, looking at your estimate and what they actually did and seeing how those differ and what needs to be done to make sure that you don't have any differences moving forward. Number four, very common sin that we see as well. As we know, we're probably going to see a little uptick in BPOs when we first start our conversion. We want to make sure that the trade partners know they cannot do anything extra or order anything extra until it's approved. All too often what happens is, in the course of just doing business, we say, yep, just go ahead and do it, and we'll figure it out later. That's going to cause a major mess to clean up. So be diligent in saying during this conversion period, if you need something extra, we need to talk about it and we need to approve it ahead of time. And then lastly, as we're looking at these VPOs and requests, we want to make sure that what's being requested actually is supposed to be there. So we can find it in the specification, we can find it in a detail, a set of plans, or scope of work. All too often, what you're going to find is the reason that BPO request is happening is because that's the way we've always done it. If it's not documented somewhere that that's the way it has to be done, then that needs to be addressed. So once UPM's up and running, your trade partners are getting purchase orders, they're starting to get used to it, everybody's becoming happy with the system. That doesn't mean we're done. We need to continue to follow up with our trade partners long-term, as well as our field builders. We recommend after a first purchase order release, we check in at 5 days, 15 days, 30 days, 3 months, and then every 6 months after that. Couple of ways you can do this. We've had success using something like SurveyMonkey. Type up your questions, send it out to all your trade partners, send it out to your field builders, your suppliers, let them give you some feedback. Or A lot of you guys probably already participate in trade councils, which is another great opportunity to call trades in and ask these questions. The questions are number one for you to get feedback, but more importantly, so everyone understands you still want information. You want to know how things are going. We gave you some example questions that you could be asking, such as what improvements has your business seen from transitioning to UPM? Very vital question. Your trade partner used to estimate their own plans. Your trade partner used to create invoices. They had functions that have now been eliminated through UPM. So you want to know, how is that helping them? Can they see the positives in what your transition gave for them? Do they see any opportunity for improvement with UPM? Do they think you could go a step farther, or maybe you went a step too far? Ask those questions, have those conversations. Make sure that they understand that you are invested in making this work the best for all parties involved. We want to make sure they're getting purchase orders timely, and are they accurate? Getting purchase orders is a huge improvement for a lot of trade partners in the country. Let's make sure that they're getting them on time and that they're accurate. Then we want to follow that up by saying, so you got your purchase order on time, you got it accurate, how quickly did you get paid on that purchase order? Let's make sure that they're seeing an improvement in processing for them to get paid for the work that they're doing. We want to make sure, are your VPOs going down? Do you feel like you're spending less time chasing after extras? A big one is, based on your experience with us going to UPM, would you recommend us to your peers? Would you tell your other contractor buddies, you should really come to work for these guys because this UPM thing has made life awesome for all of us? And then the biggest question of all, typically, very simple one, is what could we be doing to better assist you? Again, making sure the trade partner understands this is still a long-term relationship. Feels more transactional under UPM, but at the end of the day, we want to know what we can do better for you. So as we're talking about UPM estimating, there's 3 typical ways that people can get digitized estimating. The first one is individual parts and pieces tracing. This is where a lot of people start. Most of these 2D platforms that you can get already have some parts and pieces built into them. It's very fast to get started. You don't have to know how to use any of the back end of the program, and it's very adaptable. However, because we're dealing with all these individual parts and pieces, it's really hard to reproduce. The likelihood of using those parts and pieces the exact same way on multiple plans is really low. Your ability to train estimators how to do what you just did, very difficult to teach them. Go through these 4,000 parts and pieces, and this is how you use each one. And unfortunately, because we're just using parts and pieces, it allows an estimator to get really guilty of assumptions because they don't have to find something that exactly matches what they're looking for. So they can just say, well, this is close enough. So the next one, which is by far a better way to go, is to use assembly-based estimating. So now in an assembly base, instead of counting all these parts and pieces, we'll build an assembly such as a wall assembly. It's a 2x6 exterior wall, has OSB on one side, 1/2-inch drywall on the other. We'll build in all those parts and pieces that match that assembly so that as we trace that wall, we're now capturing all these other parts and pieces at the same time. Very reproducible. As long as people are selecting the right stuff, they can trace multiple houses exactly the same way. It really helps us capture those things that we often forget. Those little ancillary parts that you just forget you have to count those, build them into an assembly. That way you know you have them. And then a key pro in this method is all of our rules, so our waste factors, how we use our assemblies, what material is used in what situation. All of that can be pre-programmed into the assembly to reduce the likelihood of getting an incorrect part. With assembly-based estimating, we also need to be realistic and understanding it's going to take longer to get started up. We have all these assemblies, all these rules that we need to build, so we can't just hit the ground running on day one. We do need to be understanding that we're probably going to have to understand some of the back end of the system, whether it be PlanSwift or Stack or whoever we're using. We're going to need to know how to navigate through their system to get all these things programmed in correctly. And then the biggest downside to this method of assembly-based estimating is it does drain the system that you're using. So we use PlanSwift here at BIMaire, and in assembly-based estimating, as you keep tracing the plan and all those parts and pieces in your assembly have to recalculate, PlanSwift is going to slow down. It's going to have to recalculate itself every time. So you need to know that there will be downtime allowing for those things to catch up with you. To the degree that we have worked with national builders that actually have to trace their plan in 3 and 4 different job files just to try to reduce that time of how long it's going to take for the system to recalculate. And then the final way is still assembly estimating, but with a material manager plugged in. So from a tracing standpoint, this is exactly the same. I'm going to pick an assembly, I'm going to select my parameters, and I'm going to start tracing. What's different though is that the material manager, so all those parts and pieces are being calculated outside of our digitizer. So my digitizer is returning a quantity of assemblies, then my parts and pieces are calculating based on that information. Also, very reproducible, allows you to manage your assemblies and parts independently, which is important if you ever think you're going to change parts. Maybe you're going to change the size of drywall, or you want to change the manufacturer of your plumbing fixtures. Whatever that case is, it allows us to manage those parts outside of the system. And it does increase the processing time. So now every click in PlanSwift for us, I'm not waiting for anything to recalculate. It's just going to move and let me go on to my next step. The downsides of this method, though, it is a large upfront time investment. You have to build this database that is your material manager. It does require an extra step in compiling your data. So now your data leaves your 2D digitizer, it needs to be run through the material manager. You also now have 2 systems to manage, where you have tools and assemblies in one system, parts and pieces of the assemblies in a second system. So why would we consider each of these 3? So I want to use drywall as a common one that we work on as a group. So a lot of people are still using 4-foot drywall. And more people are becoming open to stretch board and understanding on a 9-foot plate, I should really be using 54-inch drywall instead. So in these different scenarios, if I have parts and pieces, and I have 40 plans that I need to do this to, I have to go into each one of those 40 plans. I need to identify what's being changed, remove all the old 4-foot drywall and add in 54-inch drywall instead. Then I need to go trace those walls with the new drywall, and go back through the same steps because I also need screws, tape, and mud, all of which are changed with that change. Then I'll have to export all that data to get it back into my ERP. Here in my office with highly experienced estimators, I would budget 45 to 75 minutes per plan to go through that process. So I would need 30 to 50 man hours in a parts and pieces model to go make that drywall change. However, if I was going through an assembly method, I'm going to get a little bit faster at this because now my tape, my screws, and my mud are incorporated in with my drywall. So I only have to retouch everything one time per wall. So we would budget somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes a plan to go through that process and assembly based. So I'm now down to only needing 20 to 30 hours to go through the same process. However, if I used a material manager, now I'm never even going to go into PlanSwift. I'm going to go into my material manager. I'm going to identify all those walls that are affected, and I'm going to swap out 4-foot drywall for 54-inch drywall. Adjust my multipliers for my mud, my screws, and my tape, and then queue up and refresh all of my 40 plans. In total, one of my estimators would need about 30 minutes to make the actual data change within the material manager, and then we're looking at about 2 minutes per plan to queue it up and refresh the data. So my total is now only under 2 hours to go through the same process that could have been up to 50 hours in individual parts and pieces. So as you're digging into UPM, we always recommend ease into it. Even if you want to say, I'm going to take my entire business to UPM, that's wonderful, but let's break it into bite-sized pieces. Let's make sure that we can put all of our attention into smaller groups so that we're doing this correctly and efficiently. We've set up 5 different stages that we use. Stage 1 is excavation through slab. And we start here because all of you have dealt with concrete people at some point in your careers, and you know they like to pad their numbers. So it's a great first step to jump in and realize some immediate cost savings opportunities. Stage 2 gets us into the structure. So now we're looking at our framing, our lumber, our EWP, our hardware. Another great opportunity. The biggest savings we typically see with our customers is in the framing category. It's notorious for being overestimated. A lot of old school kind of calculations being used that end up meaning we're just spending way too much money on waste items, on things that don't actually belong in the home, just the way that that framer likes to do things. Stage 3 now takes the structure and says, okay, let's close it in and fill it up. So a couple of high waste trades are sitting here. Insulation, roofing, and drywall. All common big dollar savings going to UPM, and we group those together in stage 3. Stage 4, now we're going to move to the outside of the home. Another area, exterior cladding, can be a little daunting, but it's very feasible and easy to quantify what do we actually need to be able to get the exterior facade on these homes. And then the final stage takes us through all of our finishes. Not necessarily big ticket items or great savings in UPM, but still going to see a little bit of pickups here and there, and allows you to quantify the entire house by moving into this 5th stage. So next steps, you guys have all listened to me now for 50 minutes. I'm sure you're loving my beautiful voice at this point. So what do you do from here? How do you move forward with UPM? So the first thing is start doing your research. What estimating platform do you think is best for you? What crosscodes do you consider are the most critical in your conversion? Are you going to go after the highest dollar values? Are you going after the trades that give you the most headaches? What order and what's important for you to tackle? A big one is how much time do you and your team actually have to devote to this? Do you have the free time to be able to undertake UPM conversion? And if not, then what resources do you have available to you to be able to help you through this process? As you're doing your research, also educate yourself, prepare yourself for this process. You can do that by going to UPM boot camps, programs designed to bring you up to speed in the details of how to do UPM estimating and purchasing. Or start learning, how do you actually estimate? How do you use a 2D digitizer? What's the process look like? What level of training are you going to require to get to there? And then the third is very critical. UPM negotiation is different than negotiating in lump sum. So attend a webinar or a class on preparing yourself for how to have those conversations around units instead of contracts. And then finally is get into action. In order to convert to UPM, you're going to need an action plan. You need to document, what are you doing? How are you doing it? When are you doing it? Who's doing it? Figure out what that schedule looks like. Are you trying to do this in 12 months, 18 months, 3 months? Figure out how quickly you want this done, and then help create your action plan around that. And then also, again, identify your resources. Who inside of your company is going to be involved in this? What is their actions within the process? And if you're going to use external help, who are those going to be? What are they responsible for? And how do they fit into that plan? And just so you guys know, with our partnership with Builder Partnerships, if there's anything we could do to help, please feel free to contact me, and I can walk you through what we're able to do to assist you. And then all of you will get a copy of this presentation. My contact information is on the last page. It's cell phone, feel free to text, call. I like to say I start my day on East Coast time and I finish my day on Hawaii time. So I try to be super flexible, knowing that you guys are spread across the country.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was great information. Does anybody have any questions? I do have one question from the very beginning of the webinar, and you may have covered some of this, but if anybody else has questions, please feel free to ask, and we can cover questions for a few minutes. Our first question, Dave, is how does this apply to framing in an area of pre-cut ready frame packages or panelization?
Yep. So we have quite a few clients that we work with currently that do the BMC ready frame, or they have access to wall panels. All that's different is we still want to quantify what goes into those. That's how we can understand, are we being treated fairly on those ready packs or on those panels? But we use slightly different tools because the framing methods in a panel are slightly different than framing on site. So here at BIMaire, we identify, are we using panels or stick frame? And then we'll use the appropriate settings based on that information. Now for the panel plants, I don't have a single one that we've worked with that gets a purchase order of all those broken down. But it does allow a purchasing agent to take that data of what should go into those panels, quantify them on a unit price, and verify that their panel price is matching up to what the actual material usage is for that panel.
Excellent. Thank you. We had one other question. I did go ahead and answer it on the chat, but they were asking, and you did mention you will be sending out the presentation, the PowerPoint. So if anybody wants to review the material again, they have that. And they also will have your contact information at the end of the slides. Tomorrow you'll get an email too it'll come from the Zoom account that thanks you for coming to the webinar, and I believe it does have Dave's information on there. I'll double check to make sure that's on there. So if you need to contact Dave, and a link to our recording. If you would like to watch the presentation again, you can always go to builderpartnerships.com/events #webinars, and that will give you a link directly to the webinars. Does anybody else, do you have something that you want to add?
I'd just like to say something a little bit at the end. If you haven't, when I was a builder, I used a UPM exclusively. I didn't let my trades bid; they bid units, and so did my suppliers. But the nice thing about it, it made life very simple. Your database is really simple because your pricing is in your vendor file, not in your house file. If a price changes, you don't have to change it 50, 60, 70 times. You change it once and it changes everything. My turnaround time on customization was much faster. My turnaround time on new product was a lot faster. You think about if you're a bid manager, you got 50 plans, 3 elevations, that's 150 different bids that you're going to need in from your vendors. How long is it going to take? What I found out when I was bid management, it took me a month to try to get turnaround times from my vendors. If I'm unit pricing, I can get the turnaround time in about a half hour. There's so many benefits to go into unit pricing, and you don't have to go all the way to assemblies. Assemblies take a lot of time to build. Dave has built all these assemblages. If you're thinking about going to assemblages, I would talk to Dave real quick because you could spend a year trying to put your assemblages together. Is that right, Dave?
Yes. Yeah, we have about 2 years invested into our assemblies.
Yeah. I mean, I went to class to do assembly estimating, and I realized that I was going to spend my life building assemblages in about 15 minutes doing estimates. And so I moved away because this was prior to computers. Today, with what Dave's been able to do, he's been able to build a ton of different assemblages to speed the process up. So it does speed the process up. It just takes a lot of time to build the assemblages. So, I can't speak highly enough about going to unit pricing. It makes your life so simple in the operation. I think Dave did a fantastic job of the presentation of the different ways of and different levels of going to unit pricing. So thanks, David.
No problem. Thank you, Chuck, for allowing us to do this.
This was great.
Well, with that, I think we're all done for today. Thank you again for coming to join us for Webinar Wednesday. We do have another webinar coming up next week with Jim Weigel. His presentation is, hold on, I got it here. Oh, I moved the page. Shoot. It's Financial Forum Indicators and Trends Impacting the Home Building Industry. So I hope you're able to join us next week. Oh, it looks like I have another question. Most electrician and plumbing companies fight this, I'm sure. How do you handle that?
Yep. So two very common ones. So electricians, we find that usually a compromise works best, which is a units of square footage plus any adders. So we'll define what's included in that square footage. Usually it's wiring per code. And then we're counting any additional switches, lights, outlets, anything above and beyond what we're used to seeing. We also, though, for electricians have started to see some cooperation in breaking down basically allowances per outlet or per switch. So for every switch, I'm going to budget 15 feet of wire, X amount of staples. In the plumbing, very similarly, is we typically wind up with something that looks like a per bathroom part that covers the rough and all the material with the rough based on bathroom type. Is it a 2-piece, 3-piece, 4-piece? And then any adders for second floor runs, anything that makes that baseline starting point not work anymore, then there'll be adders for those things so that the plumber is being fairly compensated for those additional runs.
It looks like that was the last question. So thank you so much, Dave, for your time today. And we look forward to seeing the rest of you at our next webinar, Financial Forum. Have a great day.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.